people. And I drove up yesterday from Penola, where I live with my husband Rick, who I affectionately call my orchard manager, and I've had the Quince-HQ orchard since 2013. So what you see here are all from the orchard. Some fruits are currently in season, and others are way past their use-by date. So please don't criticise me. I'm trying to show you the quinces as close as I can to what seem to be representative. And I'll be here afterwards. I'm happy to take your questions. But thank you for inviting me. I've known quinces all my life. I'm a child from the Mallee region in South Australia, and when I was driving up during the rain yesterday, I was reminded of how much I loved rain as a child living in the Mallee. And so I thought, well, you know, you can take the girl out of the Mallee, but you can't take the Mallee out of the girl. And I was very happy to be driving in bucketing rain yesterday, because our farmers need it and need a lot more to break the season. I'll get off my soapbox now, because I'm from the Mallee. I worked in Whyalla, and I now have lived in the southeast for about 20 years following work, and now semi-retired. So I've known quinces for half a lifetime, which is actually quite a few years. And I love them. I have a teaching background where I taught clothing design and food and nutrition. Okay, so this is actually photograph was taken in my kitchen. I've taken most of the photographs. I write a newsletter, virtually monthly, and social posts, and I'm trying to finish that first book in me about quinces. And as I said, I've known quinces for half a lifetime. I can actually tell you the name of the quinces with these. It's not often that I can look at a picture of a quince and go, I know exactly what that is. But you're looking at Powell's Prize and Portugal quinces. So they must have been, this photograph was taken early in the season. But to the uninitiated, quinces, and I'm going to pick one of these. I'm going to pick up a Smyrna, because this is the fruit that, actually this is a bit atypical, but when I ask people, have they ever worked with a quince before, cooked with it, and I ask them, what do you think is a typical quince? They'll generally go, it's big, it's ugly, it's yellow, it's hard, and it smells. I go, right, okay, because for me they're a little different, but I get that quinces can seem full of contradictions. So here's a few. They're hard, that's true, but they bruise easily. How weird is that? And in fact, you'll be able to see some of these have got little bird marks. So you can see how easily they discolour and have a thin skin. They put up your hand if you've ever tried to eat a raw quince. Leave your hand up if it was a positive experience. All right, that's about 2% of the population can eat quinces raw. But essentially, quinces have to be cooked. So that's another conundrum with quinces, is that they're generally in Australia, I might qualify this, I'm talking very generally, we can see that we've had 2% of the population can eat it raw. That means the rest of us need to be looking at cooking it. So this yellow fruit, when it's cooked, will turn a beautiful pink. And if you add a bit of sugar and if you add a bit of lemon juice, it'll go even redder, but I'll talk about that later. So some other conundrums, they can be big and wrinkled like a Smyrna. And can I just say that this is a kind of average size Smyrna. I've had some that will grow over 1 kilogram on the tree. They usually break the branch that they're on because they're so heavy. But quinces can be as small and smooth as an apple. Now, this happens to be a small mummery seedling, but it could have been a Powers Prize, it could have been a Portugal. All of those are small quinces, about this size and lovely and smooth. I might add that I've washed all the quinces bar one because I wanted you to see the bloom that happens on quinces. But if you have a quick look here, you don't need to see the names to see that a quince is not a quince. And in my experience, there's such an enormous depth to understanding quinces. So I think in terms of a Smyrna quince, a Rhea's mammoth, a Powers Prize, a Missouri mammoth, a champion. If you said to me, what's a big quince, I could say, well, it's a Smyrna, or it's a a Devronia, it could be a Vanderman, or it could be a champion, or it could be a Giorgio. If you wanted a small quince, I'd come up with some different names. So that's the depth of quinces to me. So, I know this has been a burning question. What's there to love about quinces? And love is a very significant, I haven't chosen that lightly, it's a very significant word. What do I love about them? There might be some different reasons to why. Who loves quinces, by the way? I'm not sure if I'm talking to the converted. Am I talking to the converted? 2 hands. Somebody put up 2 hands. He really likes them. So the rest of you, can I assume you have had no experience with quinces? And right, okay. So what's there to love about quinces? When you come up and have a look at the quinces, I want you to lean down into them and smell them. It's the aroma that usually gets people in about the quinces. And when you have a bag of quinces and you open that bag, the aroma is just intoxicating. It's floral and aromatic. Some say there's guava and vanilla and musk in it. I suspect it varies, but for me they're beautiful, aromatic, voluptuous fruits with the most amazing history that reaches back for 5,000 years across the world. So I love the diverse history, the diverse cuisines that embrace quinces. And I've been writing about quinces now for 5 years solidly. You can go onto my website. I'm sorry, that's my commercial push. There's a business card at the front if you'd like to join up. But there is just so much to enjoy about quinces. And if you do nothing else, put a bowl of quinces on the kitchen table or in a room and just enjoy the beauty of them. There's so much to enjoy, but I'm on a time limit. So when I talk about quinces, I don't want you to be confused with 2 other, actually there's quite a few, but I'm just going to limit the conversation to 2 other plants because they are used interchangeably. If you go on and do a search for quinces, you could get pictures of flowering quince or Japanese quince, Canemeles japonica, which is a smaller fruit. I've got a hedge of Japanese quince. They have a beautiful flower. The fruits look similar to fruiting quince, but they're smaller and harder. The other plant that is often referred to as a quince, and I don't actually have an example at home, but it's more of an oblong-shaped fruit, very similar. It's used in China and Japan and throughout the East as a tea and used in very similar ways to the fruiting or common quince. I hate that term common. There's nothing common about Cydonia oblonga, and that's what we're here for tonight. So I've limited tonight's conversation to tracking the orchard side of things and the history, the language of how we came to refer to quinces, and then I'm looking at how it spread through Europe, got to Britain, and then came out with the first fleet and hit Australia. And then we're going to jump a couple of 100 years to a couple of key orchards, including the Quince-HQ orchard. So that's where we're headed. That's our journey tonight. And I'm on a bit of a time limit, so we'll see how we go. But that's my brief apology for going through and only touching on a little bit of history. But I've given you a clue, haven't I? I've used the word love. Hold that thought. So, in the beginning, there are wild quince populations in the Caucasus Mountains, which is the mountain range between Asia and Europe. So we're talking about Azerbaijan, Armenia, Iran, which was old Persia, Turkmenistan, Georgia in southern Russia. That's the region. And there are apparently still wild quince populations growing there. And it's a very rich and fertile area. And so you can appreciate how early civilizations would have taken the fruit, and quinces weren't the only fruits growing in these in the Caucasus Mountain region. But we know that those wild populations existed, they still do, and I love the fact that quince hasn't really been a developed plant. There's been some breeding that's gone on over the centuries, but not a lot. So one of the other features I love about quinces is that it does have a very gnarled shape, and right now, as the leaves are dropping and we've had a bit of rain, they're looking just gorgeous with all these buttery golden leaves dropping from the branches and leaving this black silhouette in the orchard. It's quite gorgeous. So we're talking about early civilizations, and I'm so in Mesopotamia. We've got lots of nations, peoples coming in and out of the region. They're fighting, they're pillaging, they're doing whatever, but they're also building up the region. And I'm so grateful for the likes of academics who have an interest in these very ancient populations. And there's a woman called Stephanie Daly, Dr. Stephanie Daly, and I'm so grateful that she's been able to read these ancient Assyrian texts, and she's been able to interpret those and translate them into English so that somebody like me can come along and learn that there were orchards that were just hundreds of acres big, as far as the eye could see, with various fruits, and that there were developed watering systems, that there was grafting going on, that there was civilization as we would understand it, with food being grown. And that's just I'm very grateful for those sorts of academics, because a lot of my knowledge has come from reading translations, and in some instances translations from languages I have no idea about, and I'm very grateful that there's just so much out there about these ancient civilizations. But it's fair to say that that's when knowledge about orchards had started, and you probably know much more than I do on that front. But this particular quote, and it's one of my favourite images, that the quince offers so much at so many levels. Now, I've actually put in the name of the publication. It's from the Professional Geographer, because that's the next slide is a map that's going to show the diffusion, what's called the diffusion of the quince. In other words, where the quince went from the locus, from these Caucasus Mountains, around the world. And we're going to keep coming back to this particular map a couple of times because it's something that I can ground the presentation on so that you have an understanding about the history of quinces. Here it is. It's not a great map. I just took a photograph out of this publication. The black blob is approximately where the Caucasus Mountains are, and you'll see some arrows going left and right, and some longer arrows, and that's really sort of showing how it moved east and west. Civilizations moved east and west through the trade, the ancient trade routes, the silk, whether you want to call it the silk trade routes, the spice trade routes, but quinces went with those traders east and west. We're going to talk about the journey that went west, and the quince spread throughout the Mediterranean area. So you can think of the countries if you were going from, you know, the Caucasus Mountains and Iran, Iraq, and moving west. But the legacy of quinces is acutely tied up with ancient Greece. And the Greeks revered the quince. It was a very familiar fruit. But unfortunately, in their language, and I don't speak ancient Greek, let me tell you, the word melon was used to describe any round fruit. So it could have been a citron, it could have been an apricot, it could have been an apple, or a quince, or a peach. You get the idea. They were all called melons, or mela. But if you wanted to be more specific, you would give an additional reference. And in the case of quinces, that reference was Cydonium. And that's because the very best quinces in the ancient world grew in the city of Cydonia on the island of Crete. And they were revered. So we have that connection for the botanical name of quinces, which is Cydonia oblonga. It reaches back to ancient Greece. And I've chosen this photo because it's of baby quinces from the orchard, and I just want to point out that when you look at the champion quince, trust me, for those of you who have never seen a quince, I haven't washed this one. It's covered with what's called a bloom. It's a hairy covering. It brushes off, and there's a bit of a fallacy that a quince is only ripe when it doesn't have any more bloom. But when they're growing, when they're baby fruits, you can see how thick that bloom is. And it's interesting, in some texts, it's called a pubescent bloom or a pubescent covering, a bit like on a baby's bottom or an older person's chin. And that's very significant, and we'll come to that in a moment. What else have I got up there? So we've talked about Cydonia. It's about time for the next. Aha. Now we get to the sexy part. The ancient Greeks, as you know, were very partial to their gods, their demigods, the deities. They had their myths, their legends, and it guided them in their life. And when it I've got all this bloom all over me. When it came to quinces, there were three key myths. The Garden of the Hesperides, Atlanta, and where are we? The 12 Labours, had a mental blank then, and Aphrodite in Paris. And the fruit involved in those key myths was known as the golden apple. Melocydonium is what most people now think, since apples couldn't grow in the region because of the climate. So there's some thought that even with stories such as Adam and Eve, Genesis, might have actually been a quince rather than an apple because of those linguistic corruptions over the centuries. So we have now the golden apple. We also have a fruit that has seeds, and so I've got a botanical drawing by a beautiful artist, Australian artist called Steph Goss, and you can see the seeds. If we were to cut a quince open, and it's full of seeds, just like an apple or, to a lesser degree, a pear, of which they're related to. So quinces, figs, pomegranates were considered related to love and romance and weddings and marriage in the ancient world because they were full of seeds. You can make the connections. So we have an artwork here. It's actually of Venus, but the Greek goddess of beauty was Aphrodite, the most beautiful woman in the world. So let's imagine that this is a painting of the most beautiful woman in the world. And in the ancient Greek world, she was always accompanied by certain symbols to show that she was the most beautiful world. The roses, there are always two doves near each other, in love with each other. Oysters coming out of the ocean, Aphrodite would, wherever she stepped, apparently a tree would grow. And she would always have the golden apple. And so there are some artists, art historians, who would say that statues of Aphrodite are her holding quinces. So there's our Greek legacy. It carried on in the ancient Roman world. Aphrodite was renamed Venus. But let's look at the medical side of things. And we have Hippocrates and his writings. There's an awareness that actually it's not just the gods. There needs to be some more grounded understanding of the human body and well-being. And some of you might have heard of the term of the four humours. And so Hippocrates was responsible for, they say maybe not, but let's just run with this story, that he was responsible for creating the theory of the four humours, and that if you, and the description was you could be sanguine or phlegmatic or colic or forgotten the fourth one just at the moment, and that if you ate foods that encouraged the rebalancing of those humours in the body, then you could be assured of good health. So there was a real trade in humours and the philosophy of humours. His contemporary Galen picked it up and ran with it. And this theory of the importance of diet and its connection to health under the guise of the four humours went up until about the 17th or the 18th century. And quinces were very much a part of the medicine for relieving constipation and diarrhoea and dysentery, all of those tummy upsets. I might add that it's also still used for those reasons in some cultures, and in some Middle Eastern cultures, quince seeds, if just soaked in a little water, the thick gel that's created is used to relieve a sore throat. So there's a sustainable solution, a sustainable medicine for winter coming up. The Romans also, quinces were in an everyday food in Roman life. This is some photos of Herculaneum, and that's Mount Vesuvius in the background. So a friend of mine was on holiday and sent me these photos to show me that in Herculaneum right now there are quince trees growing as part of the replanting of those ancient gardens in the region, which I find fascinating. The next image, though, is of I think, just one of the most beautiful frescoes I've ever seen. It's at the Villa of Lilla, and I think of it as a garden of paradise. Imagine you're in a room where the four walls are all covered. This is a section of a fresco from the 1st century, 79 BC, approximately. And I just think it's beautiful. It's of Quinces. And can you imagine living in a space like that? With a painted garden around. So the Romans also valued the quinces. After the Roman Empire, we have lots of different empires across the world. I'm focusing on Charlemagne, and he moved into Europe, and he decreed in the 9th and 10th century that wherever his troops went, they should be planting orchards, because he wanted to recreate those old Roman villas that were sustainable, that grew vegetables, that grew produce, and could build the economy. Moving forward through the centuries, we come to medieval Europe, where we've got the works of the religious orders who are planting orchards, studying them, writing about them in those beautiful illuminated manuscripts. So we have the work of the monasteries and various orders throughout Europe. So you can see, I've mentioned places like Spain, Italy, France, now Portugal. I hope you're getting a sense that the quince is part of this story that we're touching on at the moment. So let's go back to that map. We're beginning to see that from the locus, the quince is spreading out across the west. It's in the Mediterranean, it's in Europe, and let's go to Britain. So we're talking about the 11th century. We begin to get a sense of the first references to quinces. Now, they're not being called quinces, because what we have happening is that we've got a merging of languages. We've got Anglo-Norman, French, we've got Anglo-Saxon, we've got Latin in the courts, I think it was, in the church. We've got a blending of languages, and we've also got a whole pile of scribes who are writing phonetically. And so you get some really unusual threads of research to follow about how a word changed. Anyway, the word C-O-Y-N-E-S is actually quince, because it looks like it should be pronounced coins. And there are lots of variations. In fact, the French word for quince is spelt C-O-I-G-N. We'd want to say coin. It's quick. You can begin to get a sense that around the 14th century, we've got a lot of things happening with the language. Trust me, it is fascinating. But in a cookbook written for King Richard II, there are 2 quince recipes. In the first recipe, quinces are referred to as C-O-N-N-E-S. In the second recipe, we see the word spelt Q-U-I-N-C-E in 1390. So Geoffrey Chaucer was involved in that evolution. The image, by the way, is of the blossom of quinces. This is one of my favourite pictures. And if you look at the front, right-hand side, you'll see a disc. And it's actually a disc of quince paste, what we would call paste. But what was known in 15th century Europe as marmalade, or yes, I'm going to say that, had different names, but I'll explain the marmalade reference. So in England, one of the earliest records is in 1490 in Leeds, and it was a port record where boxes of marmalade were imported into Britain. And they were imported from Portugal. And in Portugal, the word for quince is marmelo. The word for quince paste is marmalada. And guess what? That's evolved into marmalade. But that's another historical linguistic story, which I'm not going to tell today. But if you're interested in it, then track down the book by Anne Wilson. She's written a history of marmalade. So marmalada, that's how it was sold in the 15th century. It would come in wooden round boxes, very thin wood, and it was basically quince with sugar and aromatics. And the sugar is the significant part because we're still talking about the effects of the humoral theory. Sugar was considered the perfect food. Can you believe that? Humorally perfect. And so it was also very expensive to get, and only the rich and famous and noble and the aristocracy could afford to buy in marmalada. And marmalada became a byword for power and influence. And one person who absolutely loved marmalada was this guy, Henry VIII. And if you wanted to sweet talk King Henry VIII, you were well on the way if you gave him a couple of boxes of marmalada. So much so that there's a fascinating anecdote of a woman called Lady Honour Lisle. And she wrote letters and kept those letters over a 6-year period. So we're talking in the 1500s, the 16th century. And for 6 years, her family has copies of her letters still. And there is correspondence with King Henry VIII where she wanted to influence him to select her daughters to be a part of his court. And there are other letters where she's writing to a courtier, a politician, what's the best way to make marmalada? She wanted to know how to make marmalade to influence King Henry VIII. Let's jump ahead 300 years. We've got the first fleet coming to Australia. So I'm making the British connection, coming to Australia, and the boats are full. They've stopped off at Tenerife in the Canary Islands to stock up. They call into Rio de Janeiro to stock up, and then at the Cape of Good Hope they stopped to pick up fruit trees, including quince trees and fig trees and pomegranates and I think some strawberries, as well as a few other things. At the same time, we've got Captain William Bligh. So he planted a couple of quince trees on Bruny Island, and there's some interesting references there about in 1788 they were planted, and somebody went back in 1792 to see whether they were still surviving, and some of them were. But they're not today. Orchards were a priority in early Australia, in Sydney and Parramatta. We know that by 1804 there was something like 18 orchards up to 200 acres in size. They're pretty big orchards, actually, by, I can't tell you what that is in hectares, but they're pretty big. So we've got a lot of activity. We've got a lot of imports of quince jelly and quince jams from the mother country. And if you look at shipping records, it confirms that. So Australia has embraced quinces because of that British heritage. Let's jump another couple of 100 years and we find ourselves in South Australia. And the Department of Agriculture sets up the Blackwood Experimental Orchard in the early part of the 20th century. And within about 10 years, they've got over 4,000 individual plants of various fruit trees, one tree per variety. And Jeff, I didn't see, Jeff was telling me, Jeff, pop your hand up, you said that there were 42 listed in the, thank you Jeff, the Blackwood records. I've certainly seen some records where I've seen 36. That's an amazing diversity. that we've got, and they were wanting, the Department of Agriculture was trying to find what fruits could build the South Australian economy. What was it that farmers could grow that would give them a good return and build the economy of South Australia? That image to the right is of a pineapple quince, and it's one of my favourite. It's just been pruned. It's now in September. It's starting to burst, and it's got a lovely open framework. So if I was working for the experimental orchard, that one would have got my vote. Now I'm on solid ground because I'm talking about the Quince-HQ orchard. So 2013 is when we set it up. As I've indicated, we've got all 16 varieties known in Australia. But there were 43 varieties known 100 years ago. So that's very sad that we've lost that diversity. And I hope that folks, it might be someone here who can pick up and be a researcher who can bring back some of those old varieties. So, Quince-HQ, I sourced the fruit from 3 nurseries, Woodbridge in Tasmania, Yalka fruit trees and Heritage fruit trees in Victoria. My husband and I do not have a background in horticulture, and if I can pick on Wayne, Wayne came to our open day last year and mentioned to my husband that I prune and shape trees the complete opposite to what you're encouraged to do, and that perhaps I might have had some better outcomes. That's pure luck. I don't have a horticulture background, but I'm enthusiastic about quinces, and so I've just tried to read and bungle my way through each season, learning from my mistakes and trying to understand my favourite fruit better. So in the orchard we have 100 trees. We've got each row is an individual variety, and we have 5 trees per row, give or take where they've died. There might be a few less, so we're a little bit less than 100. They're about 1.5 metres apart. I've espaliered them, and in a 3-tier cordon. You can kind of see that. What I'd like to draw your attention to is the netting. So when Rick and I decided how big we were going to make this orchard, Rick went with a particular supplier of netting who could provide a 50-metre roll that was 10 metres wide, and so we joined 2 50-metre rolls of netting down the middle to create an orchard that was 20 metres wide. And to maximise the width of the netting, my husband Rick decided that the bottom layer should be chicken wire, and that that would give us, that would maximise the netting so that we could drive in a utility to take away the prunings. So there was a pragmatic decision to how we made the orchard. Hold that thought. We were very conscious of preparing the soil well. We're blessed in the southeast with, a beautiful climate. We worked around the clock. We dug holes, we bought a special auger, dug deep holes, backfilled it with the best quality soil that we could purchase. We built the framework and roped in some friends one June long weekend in 2013 to help us put the netting up. That's the structure. I'd already had the plants for a year. They were growing on in pots, so I'd planted out I probably had about 60 or 70 from memory. The first year I was very enthusiastic about mulching. What I haven't told you is that we have 12 peacocks, and the orchard becomes a nursery. for our peacocks. We have 2 ducks, Billy and Billy, that keep the snails down. We make our own compost. You can see where we drive the ute in to take away the pruning, so that's a summer pruning this year, just a light one. We have the peacocks, so every year in January it suddenly turns into a nursery because we've got to protect the peacock chicks from the foxes. That's great theory, but peacocks love digging for worms, and so I no longer have mulch underneath the trees. So my advice to you is don't get peacocks, keep the mulch under your trees. I can't practice that because we love our peacocks as well. We also have some local frogs. It's called a little ewing eye, and because of that chicken wire that we wanted to maximise the orchard with, we have birds coming in. Please don't do that. Get a fully netted orchard. Because you end up with the fruit being damaged, and if you've got any aspirations to sell your fruit, it won't be taken because any bird pecks will provide an opening for fungal disease to come in. But we have some other benefits on the farm. Thank goodness we're a cattle farm, and thank goodness our cattle love quince prunings. And with 100 trees, we have a lot of prunings to get rid of. So we're fortunate we can feed them out. They also happen to love the seconds fruit, as do the sheep. And that's a recent photograph. And if I feed the sheep near the compost bin, I get automatic fertiliser as well. Now, these are the 16 varieties that we've got here. One of the questions I'm often asked is, what's the best variety? And I'm going to tell you that my answer is always, what do you want to do with a quince? So I can quickly go through each of these and tell you that I don't like Angers, but it's a French variety. It's used in the root. It's used as rootstock for the pear. Apple, I'm not big on. It doesn't keep particularly well. The Champion was one that was used commercially in Australia in the early part of the 20th century. So it's that furry one. A couple of years ago, I would have said de Giorgio was my favourite quince, and I went and bought another 20 trees of it only for it to develop a lesion on the skin, so I couldn't sell the fruit. And then I got dudded because someone put in some quinces that weren't de Giorgios, so I'm now having to pull them all out because I can't tell what the quinces are. Giorgio is now my favourite quince. It's a Serbian quince. It's this one. Now, when it comes to quinces, you might not be partial to the really big ones. You might actually prefer smaller quinces. So if you're into poaching quinces like your grandma used to do, then you should look at one of the smaller quinces. But if you're into making quince paste, then go for the big ones, because those big quinces are often the strong performers. So Giorgio, not so much de Giorgio, Smyrna, Pineapple, Vanderman, Champion are going to be the big quinces, and they'll be perfect for making paste, because you don't have to worry about peeling it. You just chop, 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 cook it up. If you select fruits that are at the beginning of the season, then you'll get the best paste going. So it's a very vexed question when somebody asks me what's the best quince, because there's so much more that I need to unwrap to answer that. But there are the 16 varieties, and I'm happy to engage in a one-to-one conversation if you want to email me if you're looking at purchasing a quince. You can certainly still put in orders for bare root stock through those 3 companies that I mentioned. So quinces vary in lots of different ways. I've indicated a couple. So the form, don't get too carried away with the Missouri mammoth. At the end of this year's season, they blew out for some reason, so they're normally not that big. They're normally about the size of a Smyrna or a Giorgio. The leaf size can vary from small. The big performing quinces often have really big leaves. So they've got big stems, they're big performers, big fruit, big. I have some quinces that I love pruning, and I've got one quince that I hate pruning. The ones that I love are Giorgio is at the top of my list, and that's probably why it's my favourite quince, because it's so easy to prune. I've got 5 trees, I can have them all pruned in less than 30 minutes. There's no excess growth with that particular quince. It's as if it prunes itself. It's such a joy to prune. Giorgio, pineapple and Smyrna are quite similar. The one I least like is Angers, a French variety. It's very bushy and twiggy and shrubby, and I have no idea what I'm doing, so I fake it till I make it. So that's my least favourite when it comes to pruning. Once again, disease resistance varies. The apple is one that tends to go off fairly quickly, so you need to pick that all out early in the season, and that's often what commercial growers do. Suckering propensity, I was talking to someone earlier who's got a problem with an old quince tree that seems to be suckering across her property. That tends to happen for 2 reasons. The variety, so I don't recommend Rhea's Mammoth because it suckers badly. Each of the 5 trees in my orchard has suckered badly. So I've just got to keep cutting them off every season as low as I can. The other reason that you'll get suckering is because if a plant has been shifted, relocated, that just upsets the root system. And you can get early, mid and late ripening fruits. So you will see by the colour, the late variety ones are Giorgio, Smyrna and pineapple, because they're lovely and golden. The others are past their prime, and that's because they were the first of the quinces in my orchard starts in February, and the last of them will finish next month. They also vary in other ways, the shape of the fruit, the size of the fruit, as you can see here, the colour of the fruit. So Champion and Orange and Fuller's tend to be on the green side, but they're still perfectly ripe. The skin and flesh texture, the cooking qualities. I've cooked every quince under exactly the same circumstances, 180 degrees for 2 hours, 1 kilogram in a 1 to 2 sugar syrup. 5 of them didn't colour up. So there are some other ingredients you need to add to get the full colour out of your quinces. And the storage capabilities vary, but on the main, they last from 4 to 8 weeks in a cool place. I've probably indicated a couple of these in terms of insights about growing quinces. I've indicated they're shallow rooted. I'm experimenting with copper sprays at the moment because I'm trying to mitigate the fungal disease that's in the orchard. I've had 3 years where I've had spring rains, and that's affected the blossom, and then it's been followed by warm weather, which has set up fungal disease. So I'm trying to mitigate that. I summer prune and winter prune. That's just my thing. I don't know if that's what's not recommended, but it works for me. It's a lot of work. It takes me a week to prune by hand the entire orchard. Pear and cherry slug generally hits in December. I spray once. If I think about it, I might spray twice, and that will knock it out with some Diapel, which is an organic product. And we're nearly there. Quinces, my interest is with the culinary side, and I have a basic formula. If you've never used quinces before, then think about just starting off with poaching them. I've actually made all of these products, so you can make pastes, you can make beautiful jellies, you can poach them, and these are particular, the jelly is made in the traditional French way. The poaching is, that was a Turkish recipe that I was trying out, and the paste is what lots of people want to do when they get a box of quinces. But the basic formula is, and you can experiment and improvise, so I'm not going to give you a formula, but if you wanted, then check out my Quince-HQ site. But this was a batch of quinces, and I just removed them after every hour so that you could see the colour change, because one of the amazing qualities of quinces, unlike red cabbage where you add an acid to keep the red colour of the cabbage, when it comes to quinces, you add an acidic food like verjuice or lemon juice or wine to create the red colour. So that explains why quinces, when you cook them in a little, in an acidic sugar solution, will change magically from a pale yellow to a deep plum black colour, and that was overcooked over 6 hours. Finally, I'm inspired by all of the world cuisines. There are recipes galore. This was my attempt at making a 13th century Aleppan meatball dish, which I think is absolutely delicious, but my husband detested and would never eat it again. So when it comes to quinces, in Australia we have a sweet palate for quinces, so we like to load it up. That's why we like paste and jelly, because it's the sweeter side. But there's a whole range of savoury dishes, and from the Middle East and from Europe where they don't use as much sugar, so it's a bit of an acquired taste. But I was very chuffed with, that took me a whole day to prepare the original stock and make the meatballs and the special flavourings. So that, my folks, is a very fast tour about quinces. I think I've kept to the time limit. I've got my business cards somewhere at the front there. I'd really love you you have been inspired by trying out quinces. Check out what I'm doing, because I'm inspired by meeting people and talking with people about how they work and understand and grow and cook with quinces. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Cathy. We have got time for questions. So now, who should I give the mic to? Oh, Mark. So please do not start answering your question unless you've got the microphone, so we can hear it. We'll start with Ray and then back with Sally in the back there, Mark.
Thank you. Remember, I'm an enthusiastic amateur, so I may not be able to answer, but I hope I can.
I think you'll find most of us are enthusiastic. It's not a question, but a comment. If you'd like to enjoy quinces all year round, after cooking, freeze them. We've done them and they freeze well and keep all those lovely fragrances for the rest of the year.
Thank you. You're quite right, and I'm a Fowler's Bacola tragic, so I bottle them up so that I can also enjoy them throughout the year. Thank you.
Cathy, two things. I have over here some cutting-grown quinces from a tree in my neighbourhood that nobody can remember how old it is. It's a very ancient tree. So we don't know the name, but you might be interested in that.
Thank you.
Anyway, I wanted to ask you, have you noticed that some varieties of quince gel better than others?
I'm going to say yes and no to that, because what I mentioned in passing was the word called pectin. And quinces have a motherload of pectin when they're picked at the underripe stage. So if you wanted to make jelly, make it early in the season when the fruits are underripe. You'll still get a great flavour, but you want that pectin, and that's what will make a great jelly or marmalade or jam. But if you try and use the same recipe later in the season, now keep in mind that I've got the benefit of an extended season, but if you've got one quince tree and you know that it fruits in April and it probably finishes by June, make all your preserves in April before the birds get them. I think I was talking to Simone, was it? That's the perfect time for your jelly. So yes, Quinces will produce a different jelly, but it has more to do with the timing of the fruit ripeness, not quite a function of variety.
Thank you. We certainly learned a lot about Quinces, which is a pretty unfamiliar part for me. I would just like to ask you, because you have so many Quince varieties, but you don't really have too many of them per variety. How could you really keep your business running? Because whether the customers will have certain preferences for certain varieties.
The reason, I probably didn't make this clear, so that's a really great question. I don't sell food produce. I tried very briefly. I made the mistake of starting the month that COVID was called. So that kind of put a dampener on my aspirations. In March 2021 was when I wanted to start manufacturing. So I had to see out that contract for a commercial kitchen. So the short answer is I don't manufacture any foods. I built the orchard as a pure indulgence. I wanted to understand, I knew that a quince wasn't a quince, but I wanted to understand what was the difference between a Smyrna and a Missouri Mammoth and a Powell's Prize, etc., etc. So I am living the dream because now I might just add that I've done this so that you don't have to, that I measured every fruit, I weighed every fruit, and I made a notation of its size for 5 years. So I have a database, a very simple one. I wouldn't want to show anybody else because it's pretty rustic, but I have a knowledge base now that I can draw on, and I can confidently say a Smyrna is going to be a big fruit, but at the beginning of the season you'll get fruit that big and it's still a Smyrna at the beginning of the season. So there's a lot of variation, and the quince is, if somebody wanted to do some plant breeding, they'd be perfect because there's still so much more to get that continuity, but I don't sell commercially. I hope that answers your question.
How are you picking the ripeness of it? So very hard, you've got a slight variation in colour, yes, but very hard to think, yes, today is the day.
I have lots of windfall fruits, so I'm not looking forward to going back home tomorrow after a heavy rain because I'm going to have lots of fruit. The last of the Vandemans, Smyrna and Giorgio's. Giorgio's got the most on it, and they're huge at the moment, and I expect that half of them will be on the ground. So there's windfall, but you only have to touch a fruit and it will come away.
And will they have to ripen if they're picked early?
They will, and the best way to store quinces is in a single layer. In a cool place, doesn't have to be in the fridge, in the refrigerator, but if you do put them in the fridge, just be aware that everything else is going to smell like a quince. So if you love quinces, then do that.
Okay, we've got 2 more questions. We'll take one here and then back to Greg here, and we'll wrap up then.
Hello. I just wanted to ask, are quinces actually self-fertile? And another question would be, if it's grown from seed, will it grow true to the parent, or will it grow another variety? Because I took all Sally's one that she was talking about. She doesn't know what it is, I know what it is, so if it needs another pollinator, and I'm stuck. I have no idea what it is.
Okay. What was the first question? Are they self-pollinating?
Are all quinces self-pollinating?
Yes.
Do they need other pollinators to grow?
Yes. My understanding is that they're self-pollinating, but they will always be benefit by another quince. And I can't answer the second question because I've never grown quinces from seed, and I'm not really sure on that front.
Cathy, are all of your quinces grown on dwarfing stock or not?
Good question. They vary between being grown on dwarfing and semi-dwarfing stock, and that was more a function of I just wanted to get the quinces in my orchard, and so it was a case of whatever was available. So it took me about probably 5 years to get enough of each variety. And it didn't help that, we ring-barked quite a few of them, so had to get them replaced.
So the majority on quince A or
Quince, both. The majority, I can't specifically answer that question. I'd have to go back and look at my rustic records.
Okay, thank you. It's really been quite an amazing journey through quinces, and please come up and talk to Cathy and see the quinces here. We just have something for you, Cathy, for coming along. Here you go.
Oh, thank you.
And please thank Cathy again.
I'm assuming this is carrots eating the tops off. Oh, they do, yes. So the fruit's left hanging there with only a